Hey, what is going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. The video that I have for you guys today, we're going to be talking a little bit about importing and exporting data in and out of Giants Editor and into and out of other programs like Blender and Maya. All right, in this case, it's going to be Blender. All right, so let me explain a little bit about data, what I mean about data to begin with, right? So I'm not talking about placeables and prefabs and that sort of thing, right? This is strictly just data. And specifically, I'm talking about spline data. So let me back up a little bit and break this down to you. I'll give you a scenario, okay? So let's say you can see here that I have this big old hump in the middle of this blank map here, okay? And what I want to do is I want to build a road that goes up and over that hill, right? I don't want to go through it. Now you can see that I already have a spline here that goes through the hill, and that's no good, right? So I want to go up and over. Now we have a couple different options here. Obviously, we can use Spline Street Constructor, right? I have videos on that, so you should be somewhat familiar by now. Or if you're past that and maybe you want to start doing things in Blender and making your own custom roads, which I highly recommend, you have to get some data in there. Now, if you have a flat map, completely flat, and you're building roads inside of Blender, it's much, much easier, right? As long as you have the fundamentals down for Blender, you have an idea of what's going on inside of there. And there's a bit of a learning curve. And if you don't know what's going on, it's easy, super easy to get lost, right? So I recommend brushing up on your Blender skills before you start, getting into any of this. All right. But now if you don't have a flat map, which most of us do not, right? There's elevation changes, you have hills, you have valleys, you have all sorts of things going on. Now it's not so easy to create that same road inside of Blender, right? You need to tell Blender, where the hills are, where the valleys are, what to do in what area to do it. All right, so this is how we're going to go about that, right? So I'm going to explain that to you right now. All right, so by now you guys should be familiar with the spline tools that we use from FarmerBoysModding. So we'll go over there really quickly, and I'll show you. If you go over to FarmerBoysModding.com. All right, that's where you're going to get this script. Like most of you guys should already know this by now, but if you're new to the channel and you're just joining us, I do recommend you go back and look at some of my previous videos where I explain some of these tools, where to get them, how to install them, how to use them, that sort of thing, right? So I'm just going to kind of brush through this really quickly. But you want to go over to FarmerBoysModding.com, scroll down a little bit here under Modding Tutorials and Guides, click on that, go into Mapping. Give that a second to load. And then you have several entries in here and you'll be able to find what you're looking for. Now I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes and I'm going to show you things in a little more detail. But right now, this is where you're going to find it. Now you can see that we have a listing here for new spline paint height CSV. And above that, we have one for terrain height paint. All right, but this is the new version. So let me go over here and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so we have the spline here. Like I said, I want to build this road. It doesn't have to be a road. Maybe it's a curb next to a road. Maybe it's a fence. It could be any number of things that you want to follow this spline, but you want to build it in Blender, right? And you need to tell it where this hill is, right? And it's not always so easy if you don't know what's going on. So in this case, we are going to use the Spline CSV Creator from FarmerBoys, okay? And that's the question I get most often about those scripts, about those spline tools is what the heck is the CSV Creator? What does it do? Well, CSV in a nutshell is basically just a list of data. It stands for comma separated values, okay? And in this case, it would be all of our spline points, right? So the X, Y, and Z values all separated by commas. And it breaks it down into a text version of the spline so it can be, exported to another program. I mean, this isn't specific just to Giants Editor and splines. Many programs and applications use CSV, for like the text format to import and export data into other programs. It doesn't have to be commas. It can be other things, but you need to tell that program what it's looking for. In this case, it's going to be a comma. All right. But anyhow, so that's what a CSV is. It's just a list of data. In our case, it's going to be spline points. All right. So normally when you run this spline up and over this hill, you would create your spline and you would just keep your spline points really close together by using the insert key as you go up and over. This way you would catch the elevation change and you would go up and over that hill. All right. But when you have a bigger project, right? So you're doing a traffic system on a super huge map, that gets to be very tedious. It's a very time consuming job. All right. So in this case, I speed up the process a little bit. I cheat the system and I will make a spline just like you see here that cuts right through the hill. All right. And I will use the CSV Creator to redo this spline. But that's only half of what the CSV Creator does. All right. So let's go up to scripts. Now you can see that I have spline panels. I've updated spline scripts. Now these are all different versions of the same script. Spline panels is the most current version of the Farmer Boys tools. Updated spline scripts is a slightly older version. And then there are even older versions yet. No matter which version you have, they all work basically the same. So we're on the same page as far as, no matter which version you have. They've been updated and tweaked a little bit. So there's slight changes, but overall, the functionality is still the same. All right, so I'm going to use the most current version here. I'm going to use spline panels, and I'm going to go to spline CSV Creator. All right, and in this one, there's only one entry that you need to put in there, and that's to set the CSV distance. On the older versions, it may ask you for the map name. All right, and in this case, it would be tutorial series _2. Yours is most likely going to be different. But anyhow, like I said, put the map name in there if you're on an older version. If you're on a newer version, you just have what we see here. All right, so the CSV distance, now what it's looking for here is how far you want your control vertexes to be apart. All right, and this goes in meters. Now, if you read, they have a tutorial on Farmer Boys, and I'll show you that in a few minutes, on how to build an actual road, right? Which it's an outstanding tutorial. I can't recommend it enough. Like I said, I'll show you where to find that and how to follow along and build your road. Not complicated at all. It may seem like it at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's a breeze, right? It's really not, it's a non-issue. Okay. So, but anyhow, it's how close you want your control vertexes. Now, if you're going up and over a hill or a steep hill, you want to be able to catch that elevation change. So you want to keep them a little bit closer together. On a tutorial, it recommends 5 meters for a roadway, which is, it's pretty good. But like I said, unless you have like a sharp incline like we have here, you might want to bump it down a little bit, keep them a little bit closer together. Now, what I have learned, now this is just my personal experience. Maybe I'm not doing it right. Correct me if I'm wrong. How do I want to explain this? All right. So let's say, for example, the spline that you see here, okay, is 53 meters. Okay. Now, I don't know how big it is from the start to the end point. I don't know how big it is. It's hard to tell. There's ways to tell, but right now I just don't know. Okay. So if I use a CSV distance of 5, what the script does, it's going to do the math and it's going to figure out, how many spline points it can get out of, 53 meters, and every 5 meters, it's going to put one. So, 53 meters, every 5 meters, I'll get, 10 spline points. All right. But what about that extra 3 meters? Well, what I've noticed is that it comes up short. All right. So I kind of assumed that it was dropping the extra 3 meters. Not really sure. All I know is it came up short. So if for whatever you're working on, if you need from this distance from the start to the end, from over here to over here, if that has to be exact, I usually use a distance of either 1 or make sure. Now, like I said, it's really hard to know what the distance is between these 2 points. But if you know that, make sure that your CSV distance, it divides into the overall distance. So like I said, if this is, 50, meters from here to here, obviously you can use 2, you can use 5, you can use 10, 25. So they all divide into 50, evenly. And that'll give you an accurate measurement from one side to the other. Okay. It might sound a little bit confusing, but try it out. All right. So like I said, if it has to be an exact distance, I just go with 1. It's a lot easier. I mean, my control points are much closer together. That kind of doesn't complicate things, but you'll understand when we get further into this. All right. So in this case, since I don't know the distance, I am just going to go with 1. I'm going to make life a little bit easier on myself, not 10, just 1. And I'm going to hit create CSV. Now make sure you have spline highlighted over here in your scene graph. Ooh, excuse me. And then you want to go ahead and, put your CSV distance in there and hit create CSV. All right. So over in your project folder, right? So if you go into the actual map folder, you will now see that there is another folder called CSV data. We can go into there and there's 2 entries. One is an i3D and the other one is a text file. Now, if you open up this text file here, this is an example of what a CSV is, right? So this is your data separated by columns. So each one of these lines, each line is a control point. This is your X value, your X, your Y, and your Z values, right? Actually, I think it's a little bit different. This looks like a Y value here. So this would be your X value. Either way, this is your X, Y, and Z values. Okay. And this is what Blender is going to read when it recreates this spline in Blender. Okay. The other one is just an i3D. It's a visual representation or a physical representation of that spline. So we can drag that right back into our map. And this is what I meant about cheating the system, right? So I didn't have to put any of these control points in by hand. It did it for me, easy peasy, right up and over the hill, no problemo. Alrighty, so now that we got that done, we have a spline that we can work with that goes up and over the hill. And we also have, like I said, that text file. We have the data that we need. All right, so there's a couple other things we're going to need from this point. Like I said, if we get over here into Farmer Boys, one, if you don't have it, you're going to need the spline tools themselves. And if you look here, we have that new spline, height CSV. You want to go on there, read through the entire tutorial. So when you get into here, it tells you everything about it, everything about the panel, how to use it, what everything means. Highly recommend going through this and learning more about it. You can't go wrong. There's lots and lots to learn here. But at the very bottom of this, you will have an area where you can actually download these tools. Now, I'm not signed in right now, so I don't really have the option. Right here is where you would download it. Or maybe I am signed in. No, I'm not. It says unavailable, so I'm not signed in. But once you're signed in, like I said, you'll be able to download that, no problem. All right, so that's only half the battle. That just gives you the tools, gives you something to work with and a way to create that CSV. Okay, now you need, there's two other things that you're going to need. One, you're going to need a way to import that into Blender, okay? So if you look just slightly above where we had where were we here? Updated spline speed scripts. Let's go. Sorry, I lost myself here. Here we go, right above that. Oy, oy, oy. We have something called the Blender plugin, right? 3.0.0 and above for spline CSV data. Getting in here, this again will tell you how this whole thing works. It'll give you an option here to be able to download it. Now, the thing about this is there's two versions, right? So I have both versions. I have the newer version and the older version. The difference between the two is he just released this fairly recently. So that this version here works with Blender 3.0 and above. Okay. And that's pretty important because a lot of the tools, like the Giants exporter doesn't work in 3.0 and above. So if you want to work with the newer versions of Blender, this gives you the opportunity to do that. Okay. So you might want to look around the site here and see where you can find the older version. So maybe you want to work you're working on an older version of Blender, like, up to 2.9. There is a version for that as well. All right. And why that is important is over here on the Giants Developer Network, and that's gdn.giants-software.com. And for those of you who are not familiar, you need to be, again, registered and logged in to be able to download anything. But if you go to downloads, which is where we're at now, and you see we have a section here called Exporter. Now we have a couple of them for Maya, and then we have ones for Blender. Okay, so we have Blender 8.0 and 9.0.1. All right, so the thing about that is it will not work on anything like Giant or Blender 3.0 and above. It will not work. All right. So it only works on Blender version like up to 2.9, 2.93, 2.97, whatever it happens to be. But it will not, once you get into the threes, it no longer works. All right. So if you want to keep everything, within the same program, you can get this version of the exporter and the older version of the Farmer Boys Blender plugin, right? And then you can just keep working within the same version. But if not, like I said, if you like playing around with the newer version of Blender, then you have this. It's just important to keep in mind that the Giants exporter does not work on Blender 3.0 and above. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, you should know how to install a plugin within Blender. Let me open up Blender really quickly right here, and I will show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to open up the older version, 2.9. Okay, so we got that started. You would actually go up to edit and you would go down to preferences. And on the left hand side here, you'll see something that calls add ons, right? So you would click on that. You would click on install. And then you would go ahead and you would find that the add on that you just downloaded from Farmer Boys. You don't need to unzip it. It can stay, right in its zip form. And you would just, click on whatever it happens to be and hit install add ons and it would install for you. Alrighty. Now, if for some reason I've run into this with some add-ons in the past where it didn't quite work that way, and I did need to unzip it, so you can, if you need to, import just the Python file, um, but you shouldn't need to. Okay, and then once that installs, you'll see it come up a list sort of like this, where you can check the box next to it, and you can activate that add-on. So, use guys, like I said, you should be somewhat familiar with Blender by now to be able to get into this type of stuff. If you're not, I highly, highly, highly recommend picking up some sort of course, some basic tutorial on Blender, getting your feet wet, know what's going on a little bit before you really start tackling any of this stuff, because you're going to be easily confused. There's going to be tons of questions, and it's just much easier if you know what's going on and you can help yourself out. All right, so I'm going to delete the starting cube here because we're going to bring some information in. All right, so I already have this installed here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to import, and I'm going to go down to import spline, right? So that import spline is the add-on that we're talking about here. All right. So from here, I am going to find my tutorial series folder. I'm going to go into map, CSV data, and I'm going to pick that spline CSV data.txt, and I'm going to import that. Now you'll notice off the bat that nothing changed. All right. That does not mean that it did not work. You just can't see where it's at right now, because what happens is it keeps the same world space as it sees inside of Giant's editor, right? So it doesn't automatically center things for you. The spline inside of Blender is in the same place it would be inside of Giant's editor. A little bit confusing, I know. But if you're in object mode, you just want to go over here and you want to highlight spline CSV data. Make sure your cursor is back here inside of the viewport, and you hit the period key on your number pad, and there you go. Everything is nice and centered for you. Okay. So you can even see the hump that we have going on there, right? So it went up and over the hill. Really, really nice. So that in itself, is well worth it that we're able to get that data inside of Blender. Okay. So now if we want to make a road or something like that out of this, it knows where to go. It knows to go and follow that curvature, and everything is good. All right. So it's important to know, number one, when you have this data in here, like we do now, do not move it. Like I said, it shares the same world space as it does in Giant's editor. So if you move it and try to export it into Giant's editor, it's just not going to show up the way you want it to. It's going to be a big giant mess. So do not move it once it's inside of Blender. Keep it just where it's at. Second thing to remember is when it imports it as a single edge. Okay, it's not a mesh. It's not a curve. We have to convert it over to a curve. It's just a single mesh. And by that single mesh, what I mean by that, or single edge, I'm sorry, is I could actually, I could just extract that single edge if I wanted to, and I could run that. See that any old way? It's just a normal edge. All right. Now you can see that, all the different vertexes that are in here. There's an awful lot of them going on inside of there, or vertices, I guess we can call them. But anyhow, like I said, because it goes up and over the hill and stuff, we don't really want to work with this as an edge. We want to convert this over to a curve. Okay. And let me bounce back to the Giants, or to the Farmer Boy site really quick. And I will show you, there's the plugin. Somewhere in here, you will see where it shows you how to make a road. Not roads in Blender. Let's see, go down a little bit more. Export a spline from Giant's editor into Blender to create a road. All right, so this tutorial I highly recommend. This is going to show you basically everything that I'm showing you right now. I'm just going to skim over it because I want to show you what this tool is capable of and how to use it. It's not so much an exact tutorial on how to build a road or how to build, whatever else you want to build, a fence or anything like that. So go through this tutorial, pay close attention to it. Because like I said, if you're not familiar with Blender, know what's going on, it is easy to get lost. It really, really is. and you're going to be left scratching your head. Somewhere down the line, maybe I'll do another tutorial. We'll go through this together and I will show you exactly how to build this road. So like I said, once we have this in here, we want to go ahead and we want to convert that over to a curve. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click, convert to curve. And you'll see that this changed down here. Now this is now the symbol for a curve. Okay, so now that I'm on a curve, I'm going to go into edit mode really quickly. I am going to hit Control T and then type the 90. So what I did is I just tilted that 90 degrees. That is an important step. You will come across that in the tutorial on Farmer's Boy if you're going to build a road. You definitely need to do that. Now, once you have this in here, there's so many different things that we can do with this, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a road. Like I said, it could be a curb next to a street. It could be a fence. It could be a pipe. You know, maybe you want to do some kind of pipe or what have you. So if I go down here to geometry, okay, and all I'm going to do really is I'm going to go down here under bevel, and I'm going to just extrude this. I'm going to turn the depth up to something a little bit bigger, right? So if you look at what we have here, now we have some sort of like a pipe, right? I don't know why you would need a pipe, but maybe you do, and now you have one. All right, so it's that easy to make something, anything, you know, that you want out of this. Okay. Now, if you were going to do the road, all right, so for the road, you would actually, this fill mode, we would put down to half. Let's see here, 3D geometry. Let's see, we would extrude. It's been a little while, so you got to bear with me here. We're going to extrude this to about 3 meters. Okay, so that's starting to look a little bit more like a road. Now you want to give it those little wings. Like if you, wings isn't the right word. Having a hard time coming up with the term I'm looking for here. But anyhow, if you're familiar with Spline Street Constructor, we have those little tabs that come off of the side there. So we're going to make sure we're in profile here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll give it a depth of 2 meters. All right, so you can see that that should look familiar by now if you're used to Spline Street Constructor at this point, right? So it looks a bit more like a road, even though there's a little more work to do there. All right, so this resolution, generally we keep on 0, so it gives you this nice straight edge right here. And what that is if you look at this profile that you have clicked here, this square here is the profile. All right, so if you wanted to do something else with these edges, you could actually increase the resolution, and then you could actually start moving around these edges, right? So you can see what happened there. You know, I moved this profile, I changed it around a little bit, and that reflected in the side of my, what do you call them? My little wings or edges or whatever you want to call them. I can't really think of the name of it right off the top of my head, but that's okay, because you know what I mean. At least I hope you do. All right, so like I said, that's kind of the beginning of a road there. So many different things you can do with this. Like instead of a depth, if you wanted to do, let's say, like say a curb next to a road, we could do something like that. From here, we wouldn't extrude for 3 meters. You would do something a little bit smaller, like say 4 inches. Right now, this is really small. You're going to have to get in nice and close because we just made it that much smaller. All right. Now, the thing with these vertices being so close together. All right. I'm going to show you in 1 second here why that kind of makes a difference once you get over into Blender. All right. So now that I have this extruded, I'm going to keep it as a curb instead of going back to a road. Like I said, somewhere down the road, maybe we can do a tutorial on exactly how to make a road like this, but I'm just going to keep this as a curb just for simplicity's sake. I'm already here. Alrighty. So I don't really need to do anything else with it at this point, but I do need to convert it back to a mesh to be able to work with it. So I'm going to go back in the object mode, right click, convert to mesh, and you can see our symbol change to mesh. We're back in mesh mode right now. All right, so now I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'm going to make sure I am in face mode up here. You can see I just changed to face mode. All right, so now getting nice and close to here, you can see each one of these vertices in between is a face. All right, so we just created an awful lot of faces for this curb. Okay, so now if we were going to give it a texture, you know, and of course you do, you want to give it like a concrete texture or something like that. You want to apply a material to this. When it gets to the part with the UV unwrapping, that's where all these faces turns into a little bit of a headache, right? There's going to be a ton of them. But there's lots of ways to get around that. But again, you need to be familiar with Blender. If you're not, this is going to be a little bit of a problem for you, and you're going to get lost easily. All right, so what I'm going to do from here is I am going to, let's see, I'm going to select all my faces, right? I'm going to right click and then I'm going to hit F for extrude faces along normals. Okay, and I'm going to pull that down. Now I'm not going to make a curve this high. This is just a little ridiculous. But if you see down here in the lower left, there's a little information box here that popped up and I can adjust the offset there. So I'm going to make that negative, let's say 8 inches. I'll make that. Whoa, that's negative 48. We don't want to do that. Well, I got to pay attention to what I'm doing here. Negative 8 inch. There we go. That looks a little more like a curve. Now, I'm not going to go as far as actually applying a texture and stuff like that. Like I said, this is generally something that you would know how to do. I mean, we can cover this in a future video. I'm no Blender expert by any stretch of the imagination, not even close, but I'm sure I can handle showing you at least that much. All right, so now that I have this done, there's one thing I need to check because I believe what I did here is I probably flipped my normals around. So I am going to check my face orientation, and sure enough, it's all red. So I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to hit alternate N and then F again to flip my normals. All right, so now I'm good to go. I can actually export this back over to Giants Editor, and it should look just like the curve that it is, okay? Or that I want it to be. The only thing missing at this point is, like I said, it needs a texture. You got to apply a material to it, but that's really not what this tutorial is all about. It's just showing you the capabilities of the CSV Creator, what it's able to do, and, passing the information over to Blender, why we want to do that. And that's to create things like this. All right, so I am in edit mode, so I'm going to hit N on my keyboard, and you can see that I have this, the Giants i3D exporter. All right, so when you run the exporter, right, when you first download it from Giant software, you basically run it like any other installation program. You just double click it and you let it install. All right. Typically, it should find your version of Blender and it should install it without a problem. All right. Now, if you do run into a problem somewhere on that installation, it lets you unpack it. All right. So you can do that and you can unpack that installation and then just install it like you would a normal add-on, and there's no problems. Like I said, there's a lot of people that run into that, that very same issue where I said it just wouldn't install and then they were lost from that point. So maybe somewhere down the line, I actually will do a tutorial on how to install this. Alrighty, but for right now, I'm taking for granted that it's installed and like it's just a demonstration. It's not an actual tutorial on how to use it. All right, so I am gonna find a place where I want to put this this new curb that I'm making, let's say. All right, and I'm going to pick my tutorial series here, and I'm just going to give it a name, and we will name it Curb. That sounds pretty good for a curb, right? But at that point, it didn't actually export anything. It just gave it a location, basically. So now I'm going to go down here to Export Selected, and you can see success. The export time was 0.25 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my map. I'm going to bring up my my tutorial series folder here, right? And you can see now that I have a curb and a curb shapes file, right? So I can actually just drag this curb into here, just like so. And as you'll notice that, again, it didn't just pop right up, okay? So same thing as when we were in Blender. There's, excuse me, there's one more step that needs to be taken here. And if you go up to rotate Y, you want to rotate on your Y axis and make that 90, minus 90, all right? And you will see that it now showed up where we want it, right? So from here, okay, the only thing you really need to do from here is adjust your translate Y value, right? So you want to move it up a little bit, and you just want to move it up to whatever area you feel like, where it needs to be. Like you're going to adjust the height on this. All right. So like, maybe right in there. Well, maybe a little bit lower. Okay. So right in there. Okay. All right, so I guess you can just imagine that there was a street that ran up and over this hill and you wanted a curb running right next to it. And there you have it, right? So you can see how it followed the hill up and over really, really nicely, exactly the way that we wanted it to. All right, so it doesn't take much to imagine this as a fence or a street. Like, the tutorial was originally designed for a street. There's so many things that you can do with this just by passing this information, this spline data, out of Giants Editor and into another program, Blender in this case. All right. So that, to answer your question, that is what the spline CSV Creator does. Okay. So like I said, there's two parts to it. One where it actually recreates the spline, but the second part is where it also gives you the text version of that spline, right? The CSV part of it, the comma separated values. And then from there, you can just import it into Blender, do whatever you want to do with that data, re-export it back in the Giants editor. And there you go, Bob's your uncle, right? So everything looks really, really good. And like I said, there's just so many things that you can do with this. And as you progress and you get better with your, your abilities in map making and even into a Blender and stuff like that, you're going to want to start to do things like this. Even now, I still do things the hard way, although I'm trying not to. The project that I'm currently working on, I did start things the hard way where I was piecing together curbs little by little, and I didn't really do it this way, and I should have. It's kind of half and half. I sort of started implementing these things halfway through the build. But like I said, once, you get better at things, you're going to want to do custom objects. It's just, you absolutely will. It makes much more sense. Trust me, building a curb this way as compared to piecing it together is so much easier. Right, saves a lot of time. And the same thing with a road. This is actually building a road this way to me is way easier than it is in Spline Street Constructor. It just goes without saying. All right. Now, there is some things that make it a little bit more difficult. You have to apply the texture and the materials and stuff like that. And then you have to find a way to tie it into the intersections and create your own intersections. So it's a bit more work, but it's much more custom. And in the long run, you're going to feel a lot better about yourself having all these custom objects inside of your map. Alrighty. So like I said, this was not so much a tutorial on how to actually do this. I can do that down the road if you would like. It was just a demonstration of what is possible with the Spline CSV Creator, because that was the question. What is it? What does it do? How do I use it? And that is it. That was the answer to your question. I hope that helped. Like always, if you found these videos informative and they help you in any way, shape, or form, please like and subscribe. And that will really help me out. And it will also let you know every time I drop a new video, explaining something new and interesting that you might find useful. Alrighty, so I'm going to leave it right there. And with that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.